All right, so the 5 spiritual principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you go to the forward to the second edition, go to the forward to the second edition and turn one page in. When the program first started, there were 6 steps. Right, Bill Wilson had 6 steps when he first started the program. When he got to a chapter called How It Works in the book, he took each of those 6 steps and busted it up into 2. All right, and made them 12. But in the very core basics, there's still 5 spiritual principles or 6 steps. Right, and forward to the second edition, one page in, it says, from the doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Though he couldn't accept all the tenets of the Oxford group, he was convinced of the need of moral inventory, right? So there's the very first spiritual principle, moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and necessity and dependence upon a God. And so if you think about those, and I don't know much about the world's religions, I know very little, but it would seem to me that these 5 spiritual principles would be the basis for most religions. It's like, can you find your mistakes? Because I can always find, can I find my mistakes? Because I can always find yours. Can I confess my mistakes? Can I set right my mistakes? And when we say set right mistakes, an amends is not an apology. An amends doesn't mean I'm never going to do it again. An amends means that I straighten out the mistakes I made. And, but there's a human factor that, I'm going to make mistakes over and over again sometimes. Right? And so this is it's not an absolute. And so can I set right my mistakes, and then can I resolutely turn my thoughts into how I can help somebody else? And so when I turn my thoughts into how I can help somebody else, all of a sudden I'm not thinking about me so much. And that's the most important part about this, is take me out of the equation. Because I'm not much, but I'm all I ever think about. And so that's what the whole process here is to kind of get in alignment with God's will, right? Whatever kind of God you can come up with. The difference between Alcoholics Anonymous and a religion is that Alcoholics Anonymous does not tell you what God is. A religion will tell you what God is, and how to pray to it, and what to do, where to go to talk to God. But in Alcoholics Anonymous, it doesn't matter what your God is. The only thing that's important is that you have a God. Does that make sense? Right? And so it's not really important how you worship this God or where you go to worship this God. It's important that you have a God, right? That you have something, a power greater than yourself that you can learn to rely on. Okay? And so the steps are basically formed in such a way to where it kind of clears this path, right? This moral inventory is kind of geared in such a way to kind of clear this path. Have we got any questions about that? Go to the forward to the first edition, please. Now, this may seem kind of dumb here, but this is a way of kind of teaching people, or kind of helping people how to understand how to read the book. Right, forward to the first edition. It says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we've recovered is the main purpose of this book. And so you ask people, right, to interpret what that says. And what they'll tell you is to show others how to recover from alcoholism. And does that say we're going to recover from alcoholism? It says recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So if you've recovered from a seemingly hopeless state, what does that mean? It means you have hope. That's what being a recovered alcoholic means. Is that I just have hope. Hope that tomorrow I can wake up and not obsess about drinking. Right? So I'm a recovered alcoholic. It doesn't mean that I don't have alcoholism. It means that I'm a recovered alcoholic. Is that I don't obsess about drinking. I screw up my life in many different ways other than drinking. Right? I can hurt more people sober right, than I ever did drinking, right? But Alcoholics Anonymous is about physical sobriety. Anybody got any questions on those? And so, as this thing goes on, these 5 principles that we're talking about, those are the steps, right? Those are the only steps we actually work. Those are the only steps that there's actually something to do in them. The first step is 2 questions. Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain physical sobriety?
Well, what the question is, can I explain physical sobriety? A lot of times people want to dream about emotional sobriety, right? This is, I mean, everybody would like to be happy, joyous, and free. Everybody wants to be comfortable in their own skin all the time, right? Everybody wants to have a wonderful life and live in utopia, and everything's good, right? And that's all. I mean, that's perfect, but it's not reality, right? Sometimes things are going to go bad. I mean, what I'm talking about physical sobriety is that when my kids left, right, it took the grandbabies, it crushed me. When my parents died, that literally crushed me, right? When my best friend was murdered, right, that literally crushed me. Do you think I was happy, joyous, and free at that moment? Right, so that's what we're talking about, right? It's okay to be sad. It's okay to feel feelings. It's okay to be in grief. Right. That's what I'm talking about. Physical sobriety has to be the only thing here. I mean, we all try to get happiness. We all try to get peace of mind. Right? We all try to get this little contentment on the inside. But when it boils down to, for an alcoholic of my type, that physical sobriety is the important thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So forward to the first edition where it says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women. So anywhere in this book where they use the word we, like rarely have we seen a person fail, or in our experience, they're talking about the first 100 people. And so what this book is, what this program is based on what the first 100 people did. So this is the story of what they did, not what I did. I'm not part of we. I mean, I can stand up at the podium and say this is a we program and point up at the steps and say the first word of the steps is we. Okay, that's fine. But what we're experiencing right now is the unity part of it. And that is the we program. I can't do this alone. But when it comes to recovery, when it comes to the steps, I'm not going to follow what you said you did. Right? I'm not going to follow you. I'm going to follow what the book says they did, what those first 100 people said they did. Not what my sponsor tells me to do, not what recovery.com tells me to do, right? Right, not what this pamphlet or clinical or psychologist or therapist tell me to do. I'm going to follow precisely what the first 100 people said they did, and I will get what they got. Does it make sense? There's several promises in there, and I've been doing this a long time. I just celebrated 27 years of sobriety, and so I've been doing this a long time. And what I know is that I still have the illness, I still have alcoholism, but I don't go to alcohol to fix it. Right? I go to the steps to fix it. I'm either going to treat what I have with the Spirit or with the Spirit. Either I'm going to consume a spirit to change how I look at life and how I feel, or I'm going to pick up a pencil and a piece of paper and I'm going to do some inventory to change how I feel and how I look at the world. So I'm still going to consume a spirit. It just is it with a pencil and a piece of paper, or is it with a bottle or a bag? So that's the only difference here. I've been doing this for a long time, right? So anywhere in the book where they use the word we, us, or our, they're talking about the first 100 people. I'll give you an example. Go to the bottom of page 100, please. And this is kind of what's been going on in AA circles now. When I first got sober, there was always a talk about the inner child. You read about the inner child, right? That was the theme. Remember that, Owen?
Yeah.
Right, the inner child. Right, treat your inner child. Right? And then it went to adult attention deficit disorder.
Eight.
Right, then it went to that. And so it's gone through several cycles, and now it's at triggers. Right, watch out for your triggers. Right, I don't quite get that. But bottom of page 100, it says, assuming we're spiritually fit, we can do all sorts of things alcoholics are supposed to do. People have said we must not go where liquor is served. You guys been told that? We must not have it in our homes. We must shun friends who drink. You guys been told that? We must avoid moving pictures which show drinking scenes. So you can't wear clothes that say anything about drinking. You can't go into bars. You can't go to a football game, right? Because there's a lot of drinking going on there, right? We mustn't go into bars. Our friends must hide their bottles if we go in their houses. We mustn't think or be reminded of alcohol at all. So is that what they're trying to instill in you in some of these places? It says our experience shows this is not necessarily so. So when they say our experience, they're talking about the first 100 people. They're not talking about your sponsor. They're not talking about your therapist. They're talking about what these 100 people say. So in our experience, it shows is not necessarily so. We meet these conditions every day. An alcoholic who cannot meet them still has an alcoholic mind. And so what is an alcoholic mind? An alcoholic mind is that somehow, someday, I'll be able to drink. Right? Somehow, someday, I can control and enjoy my drinking. Somehow, someday, I can make it work. That's an alcoholic mind. We still have an alcoholic mind. There's something the matter with his spiritual status. His only chance for sobriety would be in some place like the Greenland ice cap, and even there, an Eskimo might turn up with a bottle of scotch and ruin everything. And it's, isn't that true? Yeah. So if you think you can get away from booze and stay away from booze, you're totally kidding yourself. Never going to happen. It's never going to happen. Ask any woman who has sent her husband to distant places on the theory he would escape the alcohol problem. In our belief, so here's that again, right? In these 100 people's beliefs, not your sponsors, not the therapist, right? In our belief, any scheme of combating alcoholism which proposes to shield the sick man from temptation is doomed to failure. If the alcoholic tries to shield himself, so how many times you try to do that? Right, so if the alcoholic tries to shield himself, he may succeed for a while, but he usually winds up with a bigger explosion than ever. These attempts to do the impossible have always failed. And so this whole discussion of this part started out with assuming we're spiritually fit. So how do you get to be spiritually fit? How do you get to a point to where you don't need to consume a spirit to have this comfort on the inside? How do you get to that point? You got to get this quiet. Got to get this quiet, right? This has to be at peace. Deep down inside every man, woman, and child is a fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, and by worship of other things. So deep down inside of me is this power I need, but my mind is racing out of control. Right? Anybody here doing that right now? The mind is just out of control. And as long as the mind is going out of control, there cannot be any room for a God to come in. See, how this works is I have to keep my mind quiet. And when my mind is quiet and nothing's going on up there, this God somehow finds its way in. It doesn't force its way in. It cannot force its way into a crowded mind. If there's no room in there for this God, and it's all spinning out of control all the time, then there's no room for this God, and God is not going to find his way in. So our job is to find some way to get this mind quiet and come to terms with who we are. Anybody here got any shame and guilt about things in the past? Right? Some of us have a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. And how often does that block you from this spirit? How often does that keep you down? Right? And so that has to be reconciled with. Right? That has to be reconciled with. All right, and so that's what the first portion of this book is going to do, is going to help you reconcile with the past. So it's called the first step. So let's go to page 18. Right, the first step in Alcoholics Anonymous, there are two questions. And the first step is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and our lives had become unmanageable. So there's two questions in that step, and only two questions. When you drink, can you guarantee each time how much you're going to drink? And if somebody who loved you asks you to stop, can you stop and stay stopped? What does your experience show? Not what you want it to be, not what's happening to you right now, but think back in the past. Right? The first step is the only step that's written in past tense. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, our lives had become unmanageable. So if you were to go back from this moment 5 years ago, right, in your mind's eye, 5 years ago, and ask yourself those questions within that first 5 years. 5 years. When you drink, can you guarantee how much you're going to drink? Can you? Did you? And if somebody who loves you asks you to stop, can you stop and stay stopped? When you honestly want to stop, could you stop and stay stopped? So in your own experience, is it a question of if you're going to drink or a question of when? That's powerless. Okay, so page 18. This is kind of describes what the illness is. And in the first step, it says an illness of this sort, and we've come to believe it an illness, involves those about us in a way no the human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all is sorrow from it known as angry or hurt. But not so with the alcoholic illness. For with it there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all whose lives touch the suffers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone could increase the list. So if we were to go back over that paragraph, and in the first 53 pages, the first 43 pages of this book is the first half of the first step. And so if you work a proper first step, what we do is we go into the first 43 pages and we look for statements about how they drank, how they felt, and how they thought. And we turn those statements into questions. I think there's about 100 of them altogether. So we just put this paragraph. It's an illness of this sort. Do you believe you have an illness? And would you have done the things you're so ashamed of had you not been afflicted with this illness? I mean, think about it. What type of shame and guilt do you have about things you've done in the past? And is that tied to your drinking and using? So would you have done the things you're ashamed of had you not been afflicted with this illness? Right? So if a person has cancer, all is sorrow from it known as angry or hurt. This is the only illness that gets yelled at. Right? Somebody with cancer doesn't get yelled at. Somebody with a migraine headache doesn't get yelled at. Somebody with a broken leg doesn't get yelled at. But with this illness, we get yelled at all the time. Sam, you ever been yelled at? Yeah, see, this is the only illness that gets yelled at. Only fatal illness that gets yelled at. It's a fatal illness. Right? If a person has cancer, all is sorrow from it known as anger or hurt. But not so with the alcoholic illness, for with it there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. So has this illness annihilated everything worthwhile in your life? Right, what's the next question? It engulfs all whose lives touch the suffers. Does your drama involve everybody around you? Do you create the chaos or you just keep it spinning? Yeah, well, I do a little bit of both. Does it bring misunderstanding? Did it bring fierce resentment? Did it bring financial insecurity? Does it disgust friends and employers? Does it warp the lives of blameless children, sad wives, and parents? Anybody here an adult child of an alcoholic? Mm-hmm. Right? It warps the lives of blameless children, sad wives, and parents. Anyone could increase the list. The next one says, we hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are afflicted. There are many. Highly competent psychiatrists who've dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss the situation without reserve. Jason, you got a question?
Yeah, I just had you said an adult child of an alcoholic. I'm not sure what that means.
Well, it says that blameless children, sad wives, and parents.
Right.
Right. I was a blameless kid of an adult of an alcoholic.
Adult children.
Right. My dad was alcoholic.
Oh, okay.
Okay. It means that this illness affected me when I was this big.
Right. Because of the way that they're acting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but my parents weren't alcoholics.
Well, no, it's a possibility. Right, no, that was a question. Right, it's not an absolute.
I thought they was going towards the inner child thing, the adult child.
No.
An adult is a child.
No.
I didn't know.
No, it says warp the lives of blameless children, sad wives, and parents.
Yeah.
Right, and so sometimes
That's not
our lives become warped. Right. I mean, yeah. It was a pretty crazy childhood growing up.
developmental.
Well, whatever, but it was a pretty crazy childhood growing up.
Right.
Right, with my real dad. Yeah. So it says highly competent psychiatrists who've dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss the situation without reserve. So when you would go to a doctor, would you tell a doctor the truth about your drinking and using? Not me.
I did.
Not me. I mean, I would cut my drinking in half and they'd still look at me funny. I mean, I'd tell them, maybe a 12-pack, maybe a case, not too much a day. And they would go, well, that's a lot. And I would go, shit. If I told them the truth, what would they really think? Right? And so I would never tell doctors the truth about my drinking and then kind of get pissed off because they weren't helping me. Anybody here like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it says, strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable. I remember the look on my mom's face because there was this dirt road that I used to drive down, and I don't know how many times I wound up in the side of the gully. My car on the side, filled with water, And she'd look at me and I said, I see my car in the ditch. I understand my car's in the ditch. I don't know why. Of course I see it. And she's looking at me funny. And if I could have articulated back then what I know now, it would have been, if you only knew how I felt sober, you'd understand why I drink. But I just didn't have the words to articulate that back then. If you only knew how I felt sober, you'd understand why I drink. So, it says, but the ex-problem drinker. So this is the only paragraph in the whole book that's addressed to me, as an ex-problem drinker. I found the solution, and I properly armed with facts about myself. I can generally win the entire confidence in another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. So this is the only paragraph that I'm aware of in the entire book that's not addressed to you, the newcomer, or talking about what the first 100 people did. This is the only paragraph that's addressed to me as an ex-problem drinker. Right? You guys see that? Right? Any questions so far? So the first step, so we take this thing and we look through this, the first 43 pages about how they drink. Go to the doctor's opinion. One page in. And this is where my journey began, was here. Is that I went into this treatment center running from the cops. I had all these warrants against me. Right? The cops are after me. And in that treatment center, they introduced me to this theory that my body may not metabolize alcohol. I had never heard that before. And so here in the doctor's opinion, about 2/3 of the way down, go to the title page and turn one page in, is the doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As layman, to his opinion, to his soundness, our opinion, but as ex-problem drinkers, we can say his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which you could not otherwise account. So what the doctor's theory is, what the doctor's opinion is that The physical body of the alcoholic, and this is how it's broken down, is that since the time I was like 5 years old, right, and this is my story, right, I had this internal discomfort about who I am. I can remember looking around the world when I was like five or seven, and just having this feeling that something's wrong. Something's not quite right. Right? Anybody relate to that? You know, to where you just look around the world and something's different. And so when I discovered Boone's Farm wine, when I started drinking, I started stealing Boone's Farm wine. And I started getting drunk. It gave me that sense of peace and ease. It kind of filled that void. And so I discovered the magic elixir to life. And as long as I drink this stuff, I'm cool, I can talk, I can dance, I can function in sobriety or function in society. I'm doing okay now. But what happened is that I had to consume so much of that spirit, so much alcohol, right, to get me to where I thought you were already, to where I thought society was already, that at some point my body stopped processing that alcohol because it was so much of mass quantities. It's kind of like a person who becomes diabetic. Right after a period of time, the pancreas just says enough. Right, and it just can't process sugars or carbohydrates correctly. It just runs out. Well, it's the same thing happened to me in my body when it comes to alcohol. Is that I used 2 lifetimes worth of alcohol in a matter of 14 years. I mean, if you would have spread it out, the amount of alcohol I drank should have been over 100 years. And it was in 14 years that I drank that much. And so the body changed. My body physically changed to where it didn't process alcohol correctly any longer. Just mass quantities of alcohol. My human body is not equipped to deal with the amount of alcohol that I was shoving in it. Does that make sense? And so there's going to be a response. There has to be a biological response. There has to be. It's not a machine. It's an organism. And so what happened is instead of my body shutting down alcohol, it just started a craving that wants more. And it craves it, and when I drink, I can't guarantee how much I'm going to drink. That's what happens. That is the very first thing that happens in alcoholism. And so, as the old saying used to be, the old timers used to say, is that you used to be a cucumber, now you're a pickle, and you're never going to be a cucumber again. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Once you're pickled, you're always pickled. You can't go back. It's like a diabetic. You just can't go back. The pancreas is not all of a sudden going to start processing this food correctly again. Yes, sir.
I heard a saying about what you're talking about. That's a really good. That's a really good breakdown on it. And the body says, I think you said this. You said the body says stop, and the brain says keep going.
Well, that's the allergy.
That's the allergy.
Right, that's the allergy.
When it comes to the drinking?
Yeah. Well, because it's a physical nature. Well, think about this. Most normal people, when they drink, alcohol kind of slows them down. It's supposed to relax them, right? It's supposed to kind of unwind. Does alcohol make you unwind, or does it speed you up and you just like take off?
Take off.
Right? It has just the opposite effect on me of what it's supposed to. I can be dead dog tired, working 20 hours, right? Just worked a straight 20-hour shift, and just going to stop in for a beer and then go home, right? I can have a pitcher of beer, and all of a sudden I'm feeling good. I'm ready to go. I'm not tired anymore. Alcohol has that way of responding to my body. Right? Does that make sense? But knowing all of this, knowing that of what's going on, right, and knowing that alcohol is killing me and is bad, and I need to slow down. What is the most insane thing I do stone cold sober?
Pick up a drink.
Pick up that first drink stone cold sober. In light of everything that's happened to me, the 6 DUIs, losing jobs, right, losing my kids, losing my family. In light of everything that happens to me, the most insane thing I do stone cold sober. As in this state of mind I'm in right now. This state of mind, I pick up the first drink. That's powerless. So the doctor's opinion, the next page over, it says, we doctors have realized for a long time. You guys there? It's Roman numeral 27. It says, we doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology is of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties. What the heck is moral psychology? If I were to look at this, I don't know how many times I wound up in jail. There was one time, it was because of a barroom brawl. Right, I was in jail, was sentenced to 16 consecutive weekends. This is for drinking. Right, so what do I do before I go to jail? I got to drink, right? Because they really don't care if you're drunk coming in. Right, so I got to drink going in jail. Right? And then what do I do when I get out of jail? I got to drink and go think about it. Every time I went into jail was because of drinking. And what do I do when I leave jail? How many times you been in the hospital because of drinking?
A lot.
And what'd you do after you got out of the hospital? More drinking.
Way more.
So you think some form of moral psychology is of urgent importance, but its application present difficulties? How do we get the alcoholic to see the truth about their drinking and to see what it's doing to them? You can't. You can't. And it says, but its application presented difficulties. Well, with our ultra-minor standards and our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. And so nowadays they want to give you pills for anxiety disorder. They want to give you pills for depression. They want to give you pills for dual diagnosed, right? Bipolar, whatever they call it, right? They just want to medicate the crap out of you now. They want to fix you by their synthetic knowledge. Yes, sir.
My doctor told me, you know what, I can give you all the pills you want. You know, I can give you a pill for everything, but you need to shut up and smell the roses.
He said his doctor can't give him a pill for anything, right? But the truth is, you just shut up and smell the roses, right? Which is true, right? Doctors can't tell us just to find God. Doctors can't say, well, you're just spiritually sick. You need to just do inventory and go see those people in AA and you'll be okay.